Okay, let's talk about user exploitation. Cobalt Strike does a really good job with user exploitation at scale, and you'll see that here in a few moments. First, let's talk about jobs. Beacon tasks run as jobs. The keystroke logger, PowerShell scripts, commands, the screenshot tool, the port scanner, most post-exploitation features in Cobalt Strike by design are injected into another process, and they feed information back to Cobalt Strike's beacon over a named pipe. Now, to see a list of jobs in a beacon, just type jobs in that beacon's console. And if you want to stop a job early, type job kill in the job ID, and that will give beacon a task to shut down that job for you. Let's talk about user exploitation. Cobalt Strike's screenshot tool injects into a process of your choosing. It can be a 32-bit or a 64-bit process, and takes screenshots, one per check-in, for as long as you specify. Okay? So to inject the screenshot tool in the process, just do screenshot, the process ID, give it the architecture, and specify how long you want to keep taking screenshots for. Optionally, you can leave the time out, and the screenshot tool will just take one screenshot. The keystroke logger is similar. You can do keylogger, the desired process ID, and tell it to inject into a 32-bit or 64-bit process. The keystroke logger will then run as a job in that process and report keystrokes back to you. Now, if you want to view the results of either of these tools, go to View Screenshots to see all the screenshots reported from all of your beacons, or View Keystrokes to see all the keystrokes reported from all of your beacons. Now, one thing you're going to find is if you're trying to type screenshot and keylogger to deploy those tools, it becomes very tedious to deploy those across a large number of systems. Don't worry, Cobalt Strike is here to help you. Highlight all of your different beacon sessions, either in the table view or pivot graph. Right-click, go to Explore, Show Processes. Cobalt Strike will open up a dialog where it collects all the reported process information for all of the sessions you highlighted. Okay? What you can do from this perspective is sort those processes by name. Then you can highlight all of the Explorer processes on all these sessions and deploy the screenshot tool or keystroke logger to all of them at once through this particular dialog. So this is Cobalt Strike's model for user exploitation at scale. Okay, let's take a look at Cobalt Strike's user exploitation features. Okay? So here we have 6 systems beaconing back. Okay? Now let's say we want to start gathering screenshots and understanding what's happening on these systems. We can do that. First, I'm going to close these beacon consoles, close that file browser, and I'm going to right-click, go to Explore, Process List. Okay? This is going to dump processes for all these beacons as they check in. Okay? So you can see external, internal, so on and so forth. If I didn't want to do all the beacons, if I just want to do select beacons, I could hold down Control and Alt and select and deselect individual beacons. So now we've got a list of a bunch of processes. What use is that? Well, let's sort by name. Let's come over here to explorer.exe. And now we're in a position to actually deploy a keystroke logger and a screenshot tool to all of these different systems. So let's do log keystrokes. And as easy as that, it takes care of the dirty work of picking the architecture and deploying the keystroke logger. And let's deploy the screenshot tool. So we'll just go screenshot, and we'll have it take a screenshot for the next 15 minutes. So every check-in, we'll get new screenshots. Cool. Now let's go to View, Screenshots, and this is where screenshots will show up as they come in, and View Keystrokes. And this is where keystrokes will show up as they come in. You can see we're getting these every check-in. Let's just go ahead and make that a little smaller. And so this is the activity happening on each of those systems. And let's sort that so the latest screenshots are at the top. Okay. So you can see this makes it real easy to monitor on many different systems for activity. Now this feature is a little nicer if you have these beacons calling back a little bit slower than every 5 to 10 seconds. So let's slow these beacons down. Okay, so now they're going to call back between 15 and 30 seconds. But again, really nice. You can just quickly scroll through and see what's going on these different systems. Okay, so that's the screenshot tool. Okay, let's talk about browser pivoting. Browser pivoting is a man-in-the-browser attack to perform session hijacking against websites that your target is already interacting with. Here's how it works. You inject the browser pivot agent into the target's Internet Explorer process. This is an Internet Explorer only technology. Cobalt Strike will create a web proxy server on the team server for you, the attacker, to point your browser to. Okay? Anything that goes through that proxy server on the team server will be sent to the browser pivoting agent to act on. The browser pivoting agent will get Internet Explorer to fulfill the request, and even better, Internet Explorer, when it fulfills the request, will automatically insert the user's authentication material into that request. Meaning, if the user is logged into Facebook.com and you go to Facebook.com through the browser pivot, the user's browser will fulfill those requests for you, and you will be logged into Facebook.com as that user. Okay? Browser pivoting takes advantage of the way Internet Explorer is architected and the way it does storage of credential material and reauthentication. This inheriting of credentials works for NTLM authentication, it works for session cookies, it works for cookies in general, actually. It also works for any client SSL certificates as well. Okay, let's demonstrate browser pivoting. Let's say you're flipping through the different screenshots that Beacon is feeding back to you. And you come across a user interacting with a web application that you want access to. If they're using Internet Explorer, you can use browser pivoting to get into that same application as that user. Here's how that works. First, interact with that beacon. Go right-click, Explore, Browser Pivot. Now we have to wait for the beacon to check in before it actually gives us the information. Now what we want to do is inject the browser pivot agent into Internet Explorer, but not just any Internet Explorer process will do. We need to inject into a child tab process, not the graphical shell that was launched by Explorer. The check mark indicates an Internet Explorer process that is a good candidate to inject into. So let's go ahead and inject, and we'll put the browser pivot proxy server on port 1080, hit launch, and there we go. Any traffic that goes through this HTTP proxy will come out the user's browser or the target's browser authenticated as them. All right, let's go ahead and open up Iceweasel. And let's surf over to 192.168.1.95/roundcube. You'll notice we're given a login prompt. That's because we're just trying to go to this mail server on our own. Now let's try to go to this mail server through the browser pivot proxy server. So the browser pivot proxy server is on the team server, which in this case is ads.losenolove.com. on port 1080. So let's go ahead and set that, hit refresh, and here we are. We're in the user's web application as them, and we can read their email and do all kinds of fun things as them through this application. Okay? We can even compose messages if we want and go phishing directly from somebody else's account. Nothing quite like an email from your boss to get the user to take the action you want. So that's browser pivoting. A couple of things to know. Browser pivoting does work with SSL secured sites. You will be prompted to accept the SSL cert for Cobalt Strike's web proxy server. So make sure you just hit add an exception when you go to an SSL site. Look inside the browser pivot console, and if you see it tell you to add a site to trusted host, go ahead and do that. Okay, let's talk about port scanning. One of the cool things about Cobalt Strike's model of offense is that everything happens through the beacon payload. If you're using Cobalt Strike right, you're not going to sit back in the conference room and run a port scanner to discover targets or tunnel a port scanner through a beacon. Instead, you're going to deploy a post-exploitation capability to a beacon, and beacon is going to execute that action on your behalf in between check-ins. And that's how this port scan module is designed. The port scan module scans whatever hosts and ports you like, okay? So it works just like you would expect a port scanner to work. You can specify a range of hosts. You can comma separate multiple range of hosts if you like. You can use an actual range or CIDR notation if you like. Same thing with ports. You can specify ports as ranges. You can specify individual ports, and you can comma separate them as well. The port scanner built into Beacon has 3 different methods to check if a host is alive before it scans it. It can use ARP to actually check if a host is alive. It can use an ICMP ping, or it can just assume that all hosts in the specified range are alive and try to scan them anyways. One thing to note is that the port scanner module in Beacon is designed to use asynchronous I/O to perform the scanning. So it doesn't create threads for each individual scanning action. This is kind of cool because in Windows 7 and later, you can actually have a very large number of sockets open at once, making the scanning process very fast if you choose to do so. So the max option is your option to specify the max number of sockets the port scanner should work with in its working set at one time. I recommend using 4 for Windows XP, and for Windows 7 and later, you can use a large number and go pretty much as noisy as you want. Just be aware that if you set this number too high, you might end up losing results. So it's best to keep it something sane, and 1024 on 7 and later is a good default. Let's take a look at the port scanning tool in Beacon. Here we are on our localhost team server with a beacon calling home every 10 to 15 seconds. Okay? To kick off the port scanner, just go right-click, Explore, Port Scan. When this beacon checks in next, it will give us a list of networks that we can deploy the port scanner against. So let's go ahead and do 10.10.10.0 with this subnet mask. And we can give it a list of ports. We can tell it how to discover hosts. And the max number of open sockets it should have at any one time. This default configuration looks good. Let's go ahead and hit scan. And away we go. When the beacon checks in next, it will take the port scanner module, inject it into another process, and feed the host and service information back to us over time. This module updates Cobalt Strike's targets data model under View Targets. Okay? That's this information right here. It's also the same thing you see if you come over here with the little target icon. So every time Beacon checks in, it will read in some more information from the port scanner. So the port scanner module will run in between Beacon check-ins. So let's give this a few minutes to run because we have to wait for the check-ins to occur. What we'll do, I'll come over here to the data model. So as targets become known and get added to the data model, we can see this update. Okay, it looks like our scanner module is complete. And a few things I'd like to point out. You can see over time we received different output. In the case of some services, the scanner module does banner grabbing, and it uses that information to try to guess the operating system of the discovered target. It also can do some SMB version-like activity to try to figure out from port 445 the version of the operating system, the NetBIOS name, and the domain that it belongs to. Okay, so pretty cool stuff. If you highlight these hosts in the target model and go to services, you can see the different services that were discovered as well. Okay, and so you see the banners, and you can also assign a note to the different services if you want to. So that's a little bit on the port scanner tool in Beacon. Okay, in this lecture, we talked about post-exploitation with Cobalt Strike's Beacon payload. I took you through some basic concepts to manage your Beacon sessions. We talked about session passing. I showed you how to upload, download, and browse files. We talked about Cobalt Strike's model for user exploitation at scale. We also went through browser pivoting, and I showed you how to discover targets with Beacon's port scanner module. This concludes part 4 of Advanced Threat Tactics.